Welcome to Crimson Legacy Historians, where the past is not just remembered, but brought back to life with depth and clarity. Silence, then breathing. Wet, ragged, air scraping through ruined lungs, echoing behind metal. November 25th, 1177. Before you stands a teenage boy who can barely curl his fingers around the leather reins. His hands are wrapped in linen bandages that were white at dawn, now soaked dark, the color of rust. Beneath them, flesh is decaying. Bone shows through in places. Leprosy does not simply kill, it dismantles a person piece by piece while they are still alive. The silver mask covering his face is not ceremonial, it is functional. What lies beneath would make seasoned soldiers avert their eyes. 3 miles ahead, the horizon vanishes. 26,000 warriors stretch across the plain, mounted cavalry so dense their dust clouds resemble fog rolling inland from the sea. Banners of green, black, and gold snap in the wind like predatory wings. At their head rides Sultan Saladin, 40 years old, undefeated, so certain of victory that messengers have already been dispatched to Damascus announcing tomorrow's celebration. Behind the masked boy stand 500 knights. That is all. 500 exhausted men on worn horses, armor scarred from earlier battles, lances chipped, swords dulled by months of survival. The numbers require no calculation. 52 enemies for every Christian. Odds like that are not debated. They are accepted. You retreat, you surrender, or you die. Every advisor urged him to remain behind Jerusalem's walls. Every military manual ever written calls what follows suicide by cavalry charge. Even his own body, nerves destroyed, joints swollen, skin splitting, begs him to stop. Baldwin IV gives the order to charge. What unfolds over the next 3 hours will fracture the minds of those who attempt to explain it. Christian chroniclers will call it divine intervention. Muslim historians will describe it as catastrophe, punishment sent by God. Modern analysts will dissect it for centuries and still fail to reconcile the numbers. But here is what is rarely mentioned about Montgisard. The battle was already lost before a single lance was lowered. Saladin had made no errors. His army was rested, supplied, positioned on ideal cavalry terrain. His commanders were veterans. His forces included elite Mamluks, slave soldiers trained from childhood for war. The Crusaders were outnumbered 52 to 1, so how did 20,000 of Islam's finest warriors die in a single afternoon? The answer is not what you expect. It begins with a decision Saladin made 3 days earlier, one so rational, so obviously correct, that it unraveled everything he had built. But first, context. Jerusalem in 1177 is not the golden city of scripture and art. It is a corpse pretending to breathe. Walls cracked by decades of siege, streets emptied by fear, the holiest city in Christendom defended by fewer soldiers than a modern school population. And on its throne sits a 16-year-old boy whose body is betraying him. Baldwin IV was never meant to rule, he was never meant to survive. In the 12th century, leprosy was not merely illness, it was divine judgment made visible. Lepers rang bells to warn others away. They were erased from family records, buried without names, treated as dead from the moment symptoms appeared. But Baldwin's father saw something else: intelligence, clarity, a mind sharper than disease. When King Amalric died in 1174, the crown passed to a 13-year-old who would never marry, never produce an heir, whose kingdom was already being measured for burial. Opposite him stood Saladin. Born Yusuf ibn Ayyub, he rose through discipline and tactical brilliance. By 1177, he had united Egypt and Syria under a single banner, something generations had failed to achieve. He commanded gold-rich trade routes, armies from multiple regions, and siege engines capable of crushing cities. And what makes him terrifying is this: Saladin was not cruel. He was respected, pious, strategic. He followed the rules of war. But rules do not matter when annihilation is at stake. By autumn, Europe had abandoned Jerusalem. Reinforcements stopped coming. Even the Pope quietly discussed what would happen after the city fell. And yet, There is something chroniclers mention almost reluctantly. Before battle, Baldwin smiled, not from bravado, from anticipation. A king whose nerves were so destroyed he could no longer feel pain. A boy who had nothing left to lose, grinning behind his silver mask as armies' music, 20 times his size, assembled on the horizon. Think about what that means. Pain is your body's warning system. It tells you when to stop when you've gone too far. Baldwin's warning system, music, was dead. He could push past every threshold that would make a normal man collapse, and he'd never know until something actually music snapped. Saladin, for all his brilliance, never understood what that meant. He was about to learn. November 23rd, 1177. Saladin's army crosses into Crusader territory like a flood breaking music through a dam. 26,000 mounted warriors, the supply train alone stretches for miles. Tents, food, siege equipment, portable forges to repair weapons. This isn't a raid. This is an invasion designed to end the Crusader presence in the Holy Land permanently. A Muslim chronicler writes, "The banners of the faithful covered the hills like stars fallen to earth. The hoof-beatats sounded like thunder that would music not end." Saladin's plan is textbook brilliant. Bypass the fortress of Ascalon. It's garrisoned, fortified. Why waste time on a siege? Sweep north along the coast, music cutting Jerusalem off from the sea. Strangle the supply lines. Wait for music, starvation, and internal collapse. He's done this before. It always works. Inside Jerusalem, the situation is worse than desperate. It's mathematically hopeless. Baldwin's advisors, the few nobles who haven't already fled, lay out the numbers in the throne room. City garrison, music, 750 men, mostly infantry. Available knights, maybe 500 music, if they call in every favor. Templar reinforcements, 80 warrior monks already exhausted from defending border castles against Saladin's music, 26,000. Raymond of Tripoli, one of the kingdom's most experienced commanders, says it plainly. "Sire, we should negotiate terms while we still have something to bargain with. If we ride out, we die. If we die, the kingdom dies with us." The room falls silent. Music. Baldwin sits slumped in his throne. Standing for more than a few minutes causes his joints to swell and crack. His advisors can see him trembling with the effort of staying upright, but understand what he's weighing. If he stays behind Jerusalem's walls, the city might hold for weeks, maybe months, if they ration carefully. But Saladin will burn every village, every farm, every church within 50 miles. The civilian population will suffer slowly, horribly. If he rides out with 500 knights, they die quickly. But Saladin's army, busy slaughtering music knights in open battle, might not have time to devastate the countryside. The peasants might survive long enough for help to arrive from Europe. It's not a choice between victory and defeat. It's a choice between dying with purpose or dying slowly while watching everyone else suffer first. Baldwin lifts his head. The silver mask catches music. Torchlight. "Raymond, how fast can Saladin's army move when it's spread out foraging?" The question confuses everyone. Raymond frowns. "Slower than usual, sire. They'd need time to reform ranks, and if we hit them while they're scattered, the room goes cold." "My lord," with respect, Raymond gestures at Baldwin's bandaged hands, his wasted frame. "You can barely mount a horse without assistance. Your hands can hold reins. That's all I need them to do." What happens next is recorded by multiple sources, Christian and Muslim alike, because what happens next is so insane that no one believes it until enemy chroniclers confirm every detail. November 24th, Baldwin IV, carried on a litter because his legs can't handle the palace music stairs, is brought to the royal armory. Knights help strap on his armor. His hands are so damaged the fingers won't close properly. They have to tie the sword to his wrist, music with leather straps. He orders the entire available force to prepare for immediate march. 500 knights, 80 Templars, 3,000 infantry north towards Saladin's army. Odo of Santa, the Templar Grandmaster, a scarred veteran who's fought in a dozen battles, actually weeps when he sees Baldwin lifted onto his warhorse. The king's body has to be strapped to the saddle. His legs no longer have the strength to grip. They march at night, 45 miles in 36 hours. For context, that pace would exhaust healthy cavalry in good weather. For men carrying a dying king, music, and knowing they're marching towards certain death, it borders on impossible. But here's where it gets strange. As they march, Baldwin keeps asking his scouts the same question. Is Saladin still moving north? Yes, sire. Is his army still spread out? Yes, sire. And each time Baldwin, exhausted, feverish, held upright in his saddle by nothing but will, smiles beneath his mask. His knights don't understand. They assume it's delirium, fever dreams, the mind breaking under pressure. They're wrong. Baldwin has seen something, recognized a pattern in Saladin's movements that no one else has noticed. He's counting on Saladin being smart, on Saladin making the logical decision, the correct decision, the decision that will doom him. November the 25th, dawn breaks over terrain that will be soaked in blood by sunset. Saladin receives his first warning music just after sunrise. A scout rides in, horse foaming with exhaustion. My lord, Crusader banners, Northridge. Music. Saladin doesn't even look up from his breakfast. A patrol. They'll withdraw when they see our numbers. My lord, the scout's voice wavers. There are hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Now Saladin looks up, and for the first time in his military career, the undefeated Sultan of Egypt and Syria realizes he's made a mistake. His army, confident, undisciplined, after days of easy marching, spread across 3 miles of countryside looting farms and resting horses, is caught completely unprepared. And worse, standing on music that ridge, silhouetted against the rising sun, is a figure in armor, music, topped with a silver mask that catches the light like a second dawn. One of Saladin's commanders whispers, "Is that the Leper King?" Saladin stares, then quietly, "God help us." He came. What Saladin doesn't know yet, what no one except Baldwin understands, is that this battle won't be decided by numbers or steel or superior tactics. It will be decided by pain, or rather, the complete inability to feel it. 2 p.m., November 25th, 1177. The air smells like horse sweat and fear. Baldwin's 500 knights have formed a wedge at the tip. 80 Templars in white cirets with blood-red crosses. Men who've taken vows to never retreat, never surrender, never ask for mercy. Behind them, exhausted, secular knights who said goodbye to our families yesterday, knowing they'd never return. And at the front of this impossibly outnumbered formation, strapped to his horse like a corpse being transported for burial, is Baldwin IV. His advisors are screaming music at him one last time. "Sire, we can still fall back. Regroup at --." Baldwin raises his bandaged music right hand. The gesture shouldn't be possible. His fingers barely function. But somehow, impossibly, he raises that hand-high music enough for 500 men to see it. And he drops it forward. The signal to charge. You're one of those knights in that moment. You're about to charge 26,000 warriors, 52 enemies for every one of you. The mathematics of your death are already calculated. You'll be remembered as brave, maybe, but mostly just dead. Leading you as a 16-year-old boy whose body is literally rotting off his bones, who needs to be tied to his horse to stay upright, music who should be in a monastery somewhere, not on a battlefield. But then you see something that changes everything. As the charge begins, as 500 horses surge forward and the ground starts shaking, Baldwin leans forward in his saddle. You can't see his face behind that silver mask, but you know he's smiling. And you think, if he's not afraid to die, why am I? At 400 yards, Saladin's music-scattered forces start scrambling to form defensive lines. Too slow. At 300 yards, Muslim archers fire. Arrows fall like black rain. Knights drop. Horses scream and tumble. The charge doesn't slow. At 200 yards, Saladin himself is shouting orders, trying to rally his center. His elite Mamluks, 8,000 slave soldiers, music trained from childhood to kill, are forming ranks as fast as they can. But they're terrified, not of the numbers, of the madness charging toward them. At 100 yards, Baldwin does something no chronicler can explain. He draws his sword. His hands don't work. The blade is tied to his wrist. He shouldn't be able to lift it, but he raises that sword above his head, and 500 knights behind him see their dying king holding steel to the sky, and they scream. Not a battle cry, but something primal, something that sounds like fury and grief and faith all burning together. At 50 yards, Muslim horses start backing up. Animals know. They smell death coming. At 10 yards, Muslim soldiers in the front ranks throw down their weapons, music, and run. 2:15 p.m., the Templar wedge hits Saladin's center like God's fist punching through parchment. The sound isn't what you'd expect. It's not clean metallic ringing. It's wet, crunching, full of screaming. Horses, men. The air itself seems to be screaming. In the first 30 seconds, music 300 Mamluks just ceased to exist, trampled under charging. War horses, bred specifically to be weapons, speared through by lances, moving at full gallop, crushed under the weight of men in full armor, moving at 20 music emp. But here's where it becomes unbelievable. The charge doesn't stop. Cavalry charges are supposed to hit hard, wheel away, regroup. It's basic tactics taught to every knight from childhood. The Templars keep going. They drive through the Muslim center like a blade through flesh, and behind them, Baldwin's secular knights pour into the gap, widening it, music, turning it into a wound that won't close. 2:30 p.m., Saladin center, 8,000 warriors who've never lost a battle, music breaks. Not retreats in good order, not falls back to secondary positions. Breaks. Men throwing down weapons, tearing off armor because it's too heavy to run in, trampling each other in panic to get away from those white and red crosses, music that just keep coming, keep killing, don't stop, won't stop, can't be stopped. Saladin himself is screaming at his officers, reform, reform the line. No one's listening because something impossible is happening. That dying boy on the dying horse is cutting through their ranks like he can see music the future. And his knights are following him like he's opened a road straight to paradise. And everywhere the silver mask turns, Muslim warriors flee. And here's where Baldwin's smile music finally makes sense. Those ravines cutting through the plain, the ones Saladin hadn't music, bothered scouting because he assumed he'd never need to retreat. They're funneling the fleeing Muslims into natural music kill boxes. Knights pursue, and suddenly thousands of warriors are trapped in narrow canyons with steep walls, trampling each other, suffocating under the weight of their own panic. A Christian chronicler will later write, music the ravines filled with bodies like wells filling with water, until the dead made music bridges for the dying to cross. A Muslim historian will confirm it. We fled into the earth's mouth, and the earth devoured us. 3 p.m. Saladin's personal guard, 2,000 of the finest warriors in the Muslim world, men sworn by sacred oath to die before leaving their sultan, sees the Templars coming. And they run. Saladin, abandoned, surrounded, does the only thing he can do. He finds a racing camel, faster than a horse in sand, and flees. The Sultan of Egypt and Syria, who'd never lost a battle, who commanded music 26,000 men that morning, is running for his life on a pack animal. By 4 p.m., it's over. 20,000 Muslim warriors lie dead or dying across 3 miles of blood-soaked earth. Another 6,000 have scattered into the desert, abandoning weapons, armor, supplies, anything that might slow them down. Of Baldwin's 3,500 men who fought, 000 are dead. Music-heavy losses, but they've won. They've done the impossible. When they finally pull Baldwin from his horse, he's unconscious. The straps holding him in the saddle are the only reason he didn't music fall D. During the battle, his bandages are soaked through with blood, wounds torn open by the sheer physical stress of wielding a sword his hands shouldn't have been able to hold. The knights think he's music dead. Odo of Santa, the Templar Grandmaster, checks for breath, finds it barely. He's openly weeping as he says to the knights gathered music around, he can't feel pain, that's how he did it. He can't feel his body breaking, so music never stopped. He never knew when to stop. You've just watched 500 men defeat 26,000. Music, not because they were stronger, not because they had better equipment, not because they were more numerous, because they followed a boy who'd already lost everything except his will to fight. If that doesn't remind you how much one moment, one decision, one person can change everything, then you're not paying attention to the lesson written in blood across that field. Subscribe to Crimson Historians because these aren't just stories, they're warnings about what happens when human will collides with human calculation. But here's what no one tells you about Montgisard. Saladin didn't stay defeated, and Baldwin had won the battle, but lost something far worse in the process. The night after Montgisard, Jerusalem burns candles in every window. Church bells ring for 72 hours straight. Priests call it a miracle. Peasants who'd been preparing to flee are dancing in the streets. Baldwin IV music is being hailed as a second Judas Maccabeus, the warrior who saved God's people against impossible odds. But in the royal chamber, physicians are arguing over whether to amputate. The stress of the battle has accelerated Baldwin's leprosy music catastrophically. Tissue that was merely damaged is now necrotic. Infections spreading through flesh that can't heal properly. His hands, which somehow gripped a sword for 3 hours, are swollen twice their normal size, and weeping pus through the bandages. He's 16 years old, and his body is dying faster now because of what he did to save his kingdom. The material gains from Montgisard are staggering. Saladin abandoned his entire supply train. Tents, weapons, gold, food for 26,000 music men, all of it becomes Crusader property overnight. The Templars alone capture enough military equipment and music to outfit every Christian fortress in the Levant, Saladin's war chest, literal tons of gold meant to pay his soldiers for the coming siege of Jerusalem, now funds the Crusader kingdom for 2 years. Castles that were preparing surrender terms are suddenly fortifying walls again. European kingdoms that had written off Jerusalem start sending reinforcements. For the first time in decades, the Crusader states aren't just surviving, they're winning. But in Cairo and Damascus, the loss is catastrophic. Music, Saladin's reputation, built over 15 years of careful conquest and diplomatic music maneuvering, shatters overnight. Muslim chroniclers struggle to explain it. How does the sword of Islam lose 20,000 warriors to 500 knights? Ibn al-Air writes, "This was the most terrible catastrophe to befall the believers in this age." Another chronicler is more blunt. "God turned his face from us that day. The real damage isn't military, it's psychological." Saladin had united the fractured Muslim world under one principle, inevitable victory. One march, one battle, and Jerusalem would return to Islamic rule. Now, Emir in Egypt are quietly negotiating separate peace deals. Syrian lords are questioning whether Saladin is God's chosen instrument or just a man who got lucky until he didn't. It takes Saladin 10 years to rebuild what Baldwin destroyed in 3 hours. 10 years. But here's the part that should haunt you. Baldwin's doctors tell him he has maybe 6 months to live, a year at most. The disease is too advanced. The battle accelerated deterioration beyond any hope of recovery. He lives 8 more years, 8 years of increasing agony, losing his sight, losing mobility, eventually unable to even hold a pen or feed himself. But his mind crystal clear until the very end. Music. And during those 8 years, he defends Jerusalem against Saladin 3 more times, never with more than 1,000 knights, never losing. There's a moment in 1183, 6 years after Montgisard, when Saladin and Baldwin meet under a truce flag, music, to negotiate prisoner exchanges. Baldwin is carried on a litter. He's blind now, can't walk, can barely speak above a whisper. Saladin looks at this broken boy who's haunted him for years and says something that Muslim chroniclers faithfully recorded. "I do not understand how God could give such a mind to such a body." Baldwin's response whispered through a translator, because his voice, music, is too weak to carry, perhaps so that when I win, no one can claim it was by strength alone. Saladin rides away in silence, and here's the final twist that reframes music everything. When Baldwin IV finally dies in 1185, music, age 24, body destroyed, legacy secured, Saladin waits exactly 2 years. Then he conquers Jerusalem. Without Baldwin, the Crusader states collapse in months. The kingdom he saved with 500 knights at Montgisard falls apart without him because he was the kingdom. His successors lose in years what Baldwin defended for 8. So, did he win or just delay the inevitable? Montgisard teaches us something that terrifies military historians. Numbers don't matter as much as we think they do. The Pentagon has entire departments dedicated music to calculating force ratios, logistics, material advantage. We've built civilizations on the idea music that more is better, that mathematics dictates outcomes. And then you have November 25th, 1177, 500 against 26,000 and think. E500 win. Not because of superior tactics, though Baldwin's were brilliant. Not because of terrain advantage, music though he used it masterfully. Not because of better equipment, because they didn't have it. They won because one dying boy refused to accept that mathematics determines fate. Baldwin IV understood something we've forgotten. The human will, when pushed past the point of self-preservation, when freed from the fear of pain because pain no longer registers, becomes a force that logic can't calculate. He couldn't feel his body breaking. So he never knew when to stop. And 500 men watching their king fight despite a body that should have collapsed hours earlier decided that if he wouldn't quit, neither would they. We live in an era obsessed with probabilities. Algorithms tell us what stocks to buy. Polls predict elections before votes are cast. Models forecast wars based on GDP and troop numbers. Maybe we've lost something important in all that calculation. The understanding that history pivots on moments when someone refuses to accept the math. When 500 becomes more dangerous than 26,000, because those 500 believe in something that 26,000 don't. There's a letter Baldwin wrote to his sister Sibylla shortly before his death. It's kept in the Vatican archives, yellowed and fragile. In it he says, "I was told I would die young. They were right. I was told I would die a leper. They were right. I was told I could not rule. They were wrong." Perhaps God gives us diseases to show us that flesh is temporary, but will is eternal. My hand stopped working years ago, but my kingdom still stands. By the time she received that letter, Baldwin was already dead. 2 years later, the kingdom fell. But for 8 years that shouldn't have happened. 8 years that defied medical possibility, one dying boy held back an empire.